All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Hayley Noble. I'm the Latah County Historical Society Executive Director, and we are so happy to be joined tonight by Dr. Sidney Freeman Jr. I've got a little bio for you. So Dr. Freeman is an international award-winning researcher at the University of Idaho. Under his leadership as the founder and director of UI's Black History Research Lab, the lab has received letters of commendation from the U.S. Senate and the governor of Idaho. Dr. Freeman received the City of Moscow, Idaho's Sheikh Community Unity Award in 2023, which included his name on plaques at both City Hall and East City Park. And under Dr. Freeman's vision, the Black History Research Lab and the Latah County Historical Society earned the 2024 Idaho Association of Museums Program of Excellence Award for our project titled the Black Research Initiative for Flourishing and Thriving. And most recently, he was the 2024 United Nations Human Rights Fellow and is a fellow of the Royal Historical Society in the UK. We are so pleased to join him tonight. So for this first part, we are going to hear a presentation by Dr. Freeman. So for that part, please make sure you are muted and that your video is turned off. And then once Dr. Freeman completes the presentation, we will have some time for audience Q&A. So please, if you think of questions, write them in the chat and I will be sure to read them. And then on that second part, then feel free to turn on your screens, or if you have a question you would like to ask rather than type, that's fine too. So without further ado, I will give the floor to Dr. Sidney Freeman Jr.
Thank you so much, Hayley. I would like to thank Hayley and her team for this this kind and wonderful invitation. I think I speak for everyone here that we're so grateful for your leadership. It takes guts and vision to host such a gathering right now, when in some states Black history is being banned in schools and Black History Month is taken down from the White House website, only to be put back up after lobbying and pressure. With that being said, I want to thank everyone for being here. You could be doing something else, but you're investing your time in learning more about Black history in Latah County and about the future of Blacks in Latah County. So I thank you for taking this time to do that. With that being said, I am going to share something that um, that I created just a few years ago. It's called a labor acknowledgement, which is a statement that recognizes the economic and cultural contributions that Black people have brought to the state. I now share this statement of acknowledgement of African American labor in Idaho. We must acknowledge the labor of African Americans who worked and sacrificed to make Idaho the state that it is today. Names like Mr. York, a Black man who functions as a servant for Lewis and Clark when they arrived in the land we now call Idaho in 1805. We also acknowledge the labor of a gentleman by the name of George Washington Blackman, a miner who arrived in Hayley, Idaho in 1879. Blackman Peak in the White Cloud Mountain is named after him. We speak the names of the 25th Infantry Regiment, a Black unit who was brought in to put down the labor unrest in the Coeur d'Alene mining district. And lastly, we acknowledge the trailblazer Miss Jenny Eva Hughes, the first Black graduate of the University of Idaho. May we always acknowledge and never forget these and other faceless and nameless heroes and heroines who have labored and made the state better for their contributions. Thank you. On March 31st, 1968, in a sermon given by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. at the Washington National Cathedral, he said, quote, "We shall overcome because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice," end quote. But I ask you today, if the arc of the moral universe indeed bends towards justice, who's bending it? As those who are historians or who are lovers of history, we must understand that leaving standards of morality to our society or government unattended can lead to selfishness, bitterness, hate, and the adoption of a caste system, a social caste system, where Black people are treated as the allegorical faces at the bottom of the well, as civil rights activist and legal scholar Derek Bell has warned. So, what does this mean for us at this moment? What can we do to ensure this moral arc bends toward justice for Black people and underserved communities within Latah County? I'm glad you asked. In the few moments I have left, I posit that we must do four things. If you have a pen and paper, please write these four recommendations down. If we want to ensure that the moral arc of history bends toward justice for Black people in Latah County, we need to, one, educate ourselves. Two, speak up and be supportive listeners. Three, actively make space for the Black community. And lastly, four, write up inclusive histories. I'm going to say that one more time, just in case you're still looking for that pen and paper. The first step that I am suggesting is educate ourselves. Secondly, speak up and be a supportive listener. Three, actively make space for the Black community. And fourth, write up inclusive histories. So the first key is to educate yourself. While many of us live in Latah County, we are not educated about its history. It has been a joy for me and my team at the University of Idaho's Black History Research Lab to partner with the Latah County Historical Society to develop a brief history of Blacks in our county. Many would not know that Black people settled in the town of Moscow in less than a decade of it being colonized by pioneers in 1887. The Chrisman family arrived in the early 1890s. One of the daughters of the family was Jenny Eva Hughes, who went on to become the first Black graduate of the University of Idaho. Educating yourself allows you to educate others about Black members of Latah County, such as the family of Joe and Lou Wells, who lived here in the early 1900s. Blacks in this region have a history of entrepreneurship. The Wells family were known for being the owners of a popular halfway house in Deary. And the Wells family is credited as being one of the founding families of Deary, Idaho. They were one of the original families to homestead and clear the timber to develop the town. And then there were people like Calvin and his wife Lunar, who moved their 7 children to the Tinsid area in 1910 after winning a homestead lottery of 160 acres. The King family was so beloved in the community that a monument was erected in their honor, whose inscription reads, quote, King Valley, Calvin and Lunar King, who with their family homesteaded on the site in 1910, end quote. These are just 3 examples of Black families that established themselves in Idaho just a few years after the state of Idaho was founded. I come out of the Judeo-Christian tradition where we often cite the scripture found in the book of Joel, chapter 1, verse 3, where it says, Tell it to your children, and let your children tell it to their children, and their children to the next generation. This passage is important because if we don't learn about our history and don't intentionally pass it down, share, and educate members of our community, especially the children, false assumptions related to the history of our county can take hold. However, if we are not careful and vigilant in educating ourselves about this history, how can we ensure our county is inclusive for all racial and ethnic groups? And if we are not intentionally bending the long arc towards justice, we can begin to romanticize the inclusiveness of our community and not tell the true story of racism that has permeated our county's history. For instance, in an article published by sociologist and historian James Lewin, he notes that Moscow was a sundown town where Chinese people could not live or work after dark to avoid harassment or death. In particular, between 1904 and 1909, it was recorded that the Chinese population of Moscow was driven out of our town by cowboys from our community. Notice this was during the same time that Blacks were raising their children in this community and prospering to some extent. Given the limited narratives that we have, we cannot know for sure what Black community members truly felt like in this community. It would be interesting to ask the Chrismans, the Wells, and the King families what they felt about living in a county where such violent acts could take place. So, what does bending the arc of history for justice look like in practice? It looks like doing more than expecting places of employment or our local government to champion the changes that we need in our communities. It also starts with independently or in groups reading and learning about the contributions of Black people in our county and state. So after educating yourself, speak up and be a supportive listener. I have researched the history of Blacks in Latah County and the University of Idaho over the last 5 years. There is little documentation related to Black life on campus or in the region between the 1920s and the 1950s. It causes me to think about the title of this speech, Black to the Future. Are we beginning to find ourselves in a similar period where there is a deafening silence related to Black life in our community? Does the future look like ignoring the Black people that live, work, and study here because it is socially expedient? I am so grateful for community members like Colin Mannix, who has served as a confidential and supportive ear when I have experienced racist encounters in our community. He does not try to be a devil's advocate or jump to say how great our town and county is. He just provides a supportive and comforting ear to let me know that someone in our community cares. I also think about the time my wife and I were walking through the farmer's market a year or so ago. A man stopped us and began to talk about slavery and asked us where we were originally from. We told him what part of the South we were from, and he proceeded to say how his family had owned slaves in that region. We were both stunned and froze. Another woman in earshot of the conversation saw our faces and intervened in the conversation. She shifted the conversation in a way that let the man know it was time to go. And she stayed with us until he was gone. Often when we think of speaking up and being a supportive ear, We might think it looks like looks argumentative and aggressive, and sometimes that may be the case. This woman demonstrated an approach that was confrontational but not aggressive. When you see someone being racist, interfere. If you are committed to bending the moral arc of history, educating yourself and speaking up are foundational strategies to implement. So after speaking up and being a supportive listener, actively make actively making space for the Black community. What does actively making space for the Black community look like specifically in Latah County? It's the Latah County Historical Society partnering with the University of Idaho's Black History Research Lab to conduct research on Black history in the county and hosting the findings on their website. It looks like the Moscow Chamber of Commerce and Welcome Center hosting Black history displays and forums discussing ways that businesses can better serve Black people in our county. It also can be intentionally supporting Black-owned and operated businesses like Michelle Carroll Ward's Moscow Music Academy or Dr. Anjoli Cook's Inland Eye Care Service or Mike Satz's John's Alley Tavern. Making space could also look like intentionally supporting the Black Student Union at the University of Idaho. Given that there is no longer a physical space on campus for Black people and other underrepresented people to congregate. How do we actively make our businesses and homes safe harbors for them to congregate without them feeling surveilled? It is not being afraid to host or sponsor events specifically for Black people in partnership with them. And importantly, I must stress partnering with them, not necessarily doing it for them. However, in doing so, you need to be conscious not to center yourself, but the needs of those Black students or community members. And lastly, if you want to actively create an inclusive environment now and into the future for Black people in Latah County, which will bend the moral arc of history towards justice in our region, not only will you need to educate yourself, speak up and be a listening ear, and actively make space for the Black community, but it is also important to develop inclusive histories. While some in our community may be familiar with the work related to Black history in the region, I must honor John Kraut, a community member who tirelessly worked in the early and late 2000s to educate this community about Black history. David Johnson in the Lewiston Tribune wrote that, quote, John Kraut was the driving force behind African Free Inc., a local nonprofit organization dedicated to introducing Black history and culture to the region in hope of educating a predominantly white population while attracting more Blacks as residents. I think people like this are important to acknowledge. Black history in Latah County is not something that just took place in the 1800s, the 1900s, and the first few years of the 2000s. It is actively being shaped now. How do we honor and include individuals like Dr. Linda Freeman, 2022 Idaho Business Review Woman of the Year honoree, in current and future historical narratives about the city and the county? Are we interviewing such people and including them in current histories that we are developing? If we want to provide accurate histories in the future, it is important to highlight the contributions of individuals like Dr. Jessica Samuels and Mr. Mario Pio, who have been instrumental in ensuring that Black young people in Moscow have a sense of belonging. In any future histories written about our town and county, it will be important to ask questions about who is missing from the narrative and why. Black citizens should be a part of the main narrative of histories written currently and into the future. And I would say to not be afraid of specializing in speaking about Black people specifically. It is okay for us to be a part of the main narrative and be highlighted by ourselves. So I am humbled to have been given the opportunity to share a little of the history of Latah County and what we can do to ensure that it remains a welcoming place for Black people. I know at times you might get frustrated because you feel that you are not always seeing the results that you want. But be encouraged by the lessons that I have shared today, which are to educate ourselves, speak up and be a supportive listener, actively make space for the Black community, and write up inclusive histories. Thank you for your time and attention. And now I'd like to invite Hayley Noble back to facilitate the next section of our program. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Freeman. That was both inspiring and, disheartening given the current situation we are in. But I appreciate you highlighting the fact that we are, in history right now and the importance of documenting Black history as it's happening around us. And so I can't speak for, the University of Idaho special collections or anything, but I know with the Black History Lab, with our repository, that is something we are looking to remediate. So just putting a plug in there that we want to have representative collections in the archive. And as you said, these gaps in the historical record, those are in the archival records too. And so I know that's something we can't go back and fix, but going forward, we can certainly, within the history and the archives field, can try to do our best. We do have a few prepared questions, but before we get to that, there is one question in the chat that came up. This person just observed that it seems like most of the participants in this program who are watching are women. Can you speak to any sort of gender divide within support? And I don't know, this might be a touchy subject, but I'm curious in ways to support the Black community. Do you see a divide between men and women, or is that just, this is a anomaly for our call?
I don't think it's an anomaly. I think that one of the analysis or blind spots that we have when we look at these issues, we don't look at them through the lens of power and privilege, right? But I'm going to speak, privilege can be a loaded term, so I'm just going to deal with power, right? So when talking about power, a lot of times in Moscow and Latah County, and we can talk about Idaho and the broader country, white men are often the individuals who are in power. And so even though we have white women who are in positions of authority also, there is probably also a sensitivity, a different unique sensitivity to having to being marginalized in certain ways. And so there may be a particular sensitivity to that. And so And so they may be a little more open to allying with or are thinking about some of these things because they have experienced uh, ways of being marginalized in very explicit ways. Now, all of us have, if we're honest, all of us have different levels of advantage, right? So we're not saying that um, that as a black man that there aren't certain privileges that I may have, right? But we're just talking about if we talk about from a power hierarchy standpoint, um, that often is the case. So that's what I find. And so that's not a Latah County or a Moscow phenomena. That is a phenomena at pretty much worldwide, right? And hopefully that answers that question.
No, it definitely does. And, I think that's why we see uh, the importance of intersectionality. Um, another question we had was, in your opinion, how is the Black population doing? Is it stable? Is it growing? Is it decreasing? You know, um, as Moscow has grown population-wise, do you see that also within the Black community?
I am seeing that there hasn't been much growth, right? So it still hovers. My last estimate, and I could be wrong, is still under 3%. So we the the great thing is we are here, and we've been here. The wonderful thing is, as I said in the speech, we were here just several years after the state was founded. So we were here from the beginning. So if anyone wants to create a narrative that there isn't black people in Idaho uh, and Moscow, the only people that contributed to the founding of Latah County was white settlers, which I would call people who colonized this land. That is not the case. They were not the only ones that settled or homesteaded this area. And so, what I provided you with three examples: Moscow, Tinsid, Deary. So I gave you three examples. So it wasn't just Moscow. Across. It was across the county, and so I think those things are important to note.
Definitely. Speaking of which, I'm curious, how did you find yourself in Idaho? And why are you so passionate about the history of the Black community here?
Yeah. So I got here because there was a job opening that I saw on Facebook. So I had a former professor um, that that was a part of my master's and doctoral training. He had posted a position related to higher education leadership. That is what my area of training is at the master's and PhD level. And I said that would be cool to do that. Uh, but of course, it was in Idaho, so I reached back out to him. He said, "Well, listen, put your name in the hat." By the time I put my name in the hat, he had left. Him and his wife had left Idaho and moved to Australia. But this would never happen. This would never happen now. But I got a phone call from a colleague who was the search chair, and they said, Dr. Freeman, are you still interested in maybe interviewing for this position at Idaho? At Idaho, I said sure, and they said, well, let's work with our admin person, and we're going to fly you out in the next several weeks. So there wasn't a pre-interview process. They just flew me out, and so After interviewing, I got everything that I had asked for. When my wife interviewed, she interviewed for several positions here because I was sharing that I would not come without her being taken care of. And we found a church in town that embraced us right away. And so we both said, I guess Moscow is where we wanted to be. Then over time, I always had an interest in kind of figuring out, you know, if I'm going to be in a place, who are the other black people in the place? So I actually talked to my chair, and I went through the whole university website, and anyone that looked like they were African American, I asked to see if they, I asked it to see if I could speak with them, and I wanted to know if this was a place that was friendly to black people. And I was told that individuals that I talked to told me that it was a wonderful place and encouraged me to come. And so that was reassuring. Um, and and As I think about my passion for Moscow and our university, I think that it's that we actually have a wonderful narrative around um, Black people being able to progress and to make a unique contribution to our local community and to our university. Because when people think of Idaho, they think of Boise first of all, and then second of all, they're not thinking Black people are going to be in the rural parts of the state. But we're here and contributing. And although there have been some challenges and continue to be some challenges, and I'm honest about that. I think it's important to share share the story that people can thrive and flourish in Latah. Black people can thrive and flourish in Latah County, um, and can continue to do that if we are intentional. So, a long answer to a very short question.
No, I'm always very curious about that just because I mean I think everybody on this call knows that Idaho, we have a very white supremacist reputation
Mhm.
in other parts of the country, and I'm always curious how different people from all walks of life find themselves here and whether it is a welcoming place because I think I speak for all of us on the call that we want it to be welcoming, which is partly why we are having this conversational part at the end of your presentation.
Mhm.
Um, we had a couple questions in a similar vein. You do a lot of work on the university, but of course, not everybody who lives in Latah County is associated with the university.
Mhm.
Are there things that the community can do to support Black students when they're not on campus? And
Hmm.
and what might those look like?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that people can do is think about. So in the speech, I said we need to think about how do we open our places of business, um, to provide space for our black students now that we don't have the Black Cultural Center, the Black and African American Cultural Center open on campus right now. So for those who may not know, because of a decision by the State Board of Education, they I was going to say requested, but essentially they told our university that cultural centers like the Black and African American Cultural Center, the Women's Center, the Multicultural Center, the LGBTQIA Center, that they would need to close down, and therefore there is no specific space where our Black students can congregate, and that was specifically geared with them in mind. And so when I think about that, where the community can step up is to ensure that there are spaces on campus, where there are spaces on campus, excuse me, not on campus, within the community where where they could have events and congregate. So I think about something, I think it's the 1912 uh, building, right? What if what if the 1912 may say, well, we can't host them and give the space for free, but how about members of the community pull their resources together and make sure that Black students are able to have access to a room there so they can congregate and have events. So that weight of raising the money to have that space is not on the students. What about coming together and making sure if you have built relationship with some of the students, opening up your home for them to have meals at your home and things like that. I think those things are important. So those are things right off the top of my head that we can make sure that students can feel welcome. And something else that we've mentioned is being intentional. And if you have a business in town, to ensure that there may be products that are known to be utilized by African Americans. And those things, you can start having conversations with other African Americans and asking them, uh, what are some things that you may need in the community that we don't have, and can we encourage some local businesses to offer those particular products for Blacks in the community?
Yeah, those are great suggestions. Thank you. Um, let's see. Why don't do you mind, can you tell us a little bit about the Black History Research Lab, what it is, why you started it, and how you see the future of that continuing?
Yeah, so the Black History Research Lab, uh, that kind of came out of a desire to learn more about the contributions of Blacks at the university, because we would talk about Jenny Eva Hughes being the first person of color or the first Black person to have graduated or attended the University of Idaho, but we really didn't know about anyone else. And so one of the things that I thought was important was to do more research. And so our partner, I'm not a trained historian beyond taking a couple extra classes in history and auditing a course or two, even as a faculty member at the university. But I had a vision to kind of see um, how we could highlight some of the contributions of Blacks at at the university. That turned into a larger project, and one of the key findings that we had in our initial research was that we had a Black cultural space on campus over 50 years ago. And so and after the tragic death of George Floyd and conversation that ensued after that around the need to support Black students, uh, we pushed for two things. We pushed for uh, a designated space, and we pushed for staffing of that space, because initially when we did the research, we found that the reason why the Black Cultural Center, our space, was not sustainable back then in the 1970s was because there were no staff members, meaning that it was student run and student led. Well, students graduate and things like that. So if you just leave it to students, then it did not have the it didn't have the sustainability and support. So we fought to have a some staff hired, some staff hired, and that happened, and we got some space. Now, it wasn't the space that we were initially told we would have, but we had a space, and with that, we grounded that in history. I say that to say we grounded that in history. So when I went to President Green, I said that we're not asking for something new. We're asking for something that historically had been there, and that strengthened the argument. And from that, it rolled into us having a separate space. And I'm just going to take a little more time with this guy. I think is important to have on the record since we're recording this, right? Um, what was important was that there is a building called the Integrated Research um, Institute and Center, something to that effect is called if IRIC, which is our top research facility within the university. So essentially, the thought is that all the top research in the university is allowed space, and projects is allowed space in that particular building. So it's like $40 million or something like that, right? Well, I made the argument that if you're going to have a a space that is, and you say that it's for top research top research across the university, and you don't have social science and humanities research, then what you're saying is not accurate, right? And so what I like to say, and I and it's true, we have been the only humanities, social science research project that has stood on its own in that building. So you have like a writing center that's affiliated with the hard sciences. You have other projects that are in service to science projects. But what I really like about the work that we've done is we've been able to help people to rethink how history can be seen as rigorous research this in this push for to be a research one, which means we're a top tier research university, and it also lastly helped even the history department to think about itself as, oh, and I'm not even from the history department, but a history lab. What does that mean, and how can you? And so pushing people to think about our work in a different way. So another long answer to a simple question, but I wanted to lay that out to have that on the record.
No, I love that. I mean, I think it's very evident with how passionately you speak about how important this is. And I mean, I'm a humanities lover myself, and I love that you're able to frame it in this way that keeps history and the rest of the humanities relevant. And I think that's going to be something that, practitioners in our field, we have to do these kinds of creative thinking to continually demonstrate the relevance of our field, especially when, you look at this focus on STEM and science, but integrating the two, I think they are so interdisciplinary in a way, because how can you understand science if you don't know context? So anyways, no, I love that answer. That's wonderful. Hey, we had another question in the chat. This person there wondering, how do you balance being a representative of the university while also advocating in these difficult times that, this university, they've made these decisions, and yet you're also trying to help be an advocate for Black students? Are those roles compatible?
That is a important question. as someone who is committed to Black people, and I am one who has chosen that as um, as well, maybe it has chosen me as a part of my purpose in life is empowering Black people. I am compelled to ensure that Black people are flourishing and thriving and figuring out ways to do that. So while I am a professor, in um, is what I do to make money, right? Is what I do, but that's not who I am. Who I am is a Black man that is committed to my people. And so I use whatever tools that I have to support that, And so I am I am figuring that out as I go, right? So in these times, I'm trying to configure what that looks like. I'm having really frank conversations with the leadership at the university. How will I be? How will I be protected if my work is targeted? What does that look like? What if I am personally targeted? Is it just going to be that you say that Dr. Freeman has tenure and he has freedom of expression? Is that going to be enough to make sure that I am protected? So we have to have real conversations about what that looks like into the future. But I am committed to the advancement of Black people as long as God gives me breath.
No, that's a great answer. Um, Along those lines, I'm curious, we're living in a difficult time right now. How do you stay hopeful for the future and this work that you do?
So there is something called uh, Afro pessimism, right? And but there's also something called the audacity of hope. And so many of us who do this work, especially in environments like Idaho, we don't have the luxury of being one or the other. We have to embody both. So, what I mean by Afro pessimism, we have to be realistic about what is going on. So we can't just say I can't just do a presentation and say Moscow and Latah County has been um, has been great to African Americans and Black people, and there's really no problems, or even if they are, it's going to get better. It's going to be great, right? I have to also balance that with my pessimism and saying that we have to shape that future, right? I have to balance those things, the reality that we live in, but having that hope for the future. I have to do that. Because we have young people that are counting on us, right? And that's not just Black students. That uh, are other people from other communities um, that are looking for hope in these times. I don't. So my answer is that I am trying to figure out how to balance both of those sides. I may not do it perfectly, but I'm trying to do that.
Definitely. And it sounds like you really are leading by example in that regard for your students. Let's see. What, I know you're on sabbatical right now. What is coming up next in your career path?
I don't know. I don't know.
That's a
I don't
very
know.
good answer.
So it's interesting that you asked that question because I had to come out of my sabbatical today because at this time of year, some of you that may be affiliated with the university know this is the time when we have our annual reviews and people start asking about, what projects are you working on in the future and things like that. And I'm in a unique spot where I'm trying to figure out, you know, um, if I continue to as I continue to do this work, how do I do it in a way that empowers people, but also doesn't put me in front of the firing squad? I so when and Now that Idaho is literally trying to get firing squads back, not figuratively, really, uh, I'm really I'm really trying to be thoughtful about the ways in which I do that. I also want to say right here that I think it's important if you know of African Americans that are doing this work locally. Um, you know, intentionally intentionally buy them a coffee or do some. It is hard to kind of navigate these times, right? And so you don't have to talk their ear off or anything like that, but it being you see them in line, buy them some coffee or just say a kind word of encouragement as we navigate these times. It's if you are white and it's hard for you to navigate. Imagine if you are African American and you're navigating the country right now in a place that doesn't have a lot of people that look like you, and you can perceive or I shouldn't not say perceive. When people say DEI, for instance, most black people think that's another term for saying black, right? They can't say the N word, right? So they say DEI or woke or all these terms. So yes, they may apply it to other communities, but at the core, we hear black, and so I think that's important to acknowledge.
Definitely. And I know I appreciate your concrete examples too that you provided in your talk and throughout these questions, of ways that white people can support you. I think having those specific examples are helpful because um, I know that occasionally there are times that you overthink things and you don't want to be the white savior and all of that kind of stuff. But I think those examples you talked about really help contextualize it and um, bring it back to centering the Black community is really the key.
And and I always want to be careful that I am one black person of many, right? Or of some in our case, right? And so what I would appreciate may look different than what someone else would appreciate. But I think most people do appreciate if you get them a coffee or something, right? That's not look, give them a gift card to Dutch Brothers or something like that. Everybody
Yeah,
would appreciate that. So I think
totally.
that's not a harmful one.
All right. Well, I think we have one more question in the chat before we wrap up.
Mhm.
This person just says, our community doesn't really have very many opportunities to see Black culture in action or in our everyday life. Are there ways that we can support more of those efforts? And I think with the caveat that Black culture can mean a lot of different things.
Right. Right, right. So I think one place that is trying to do that in a very concrete way is the Kenworthy Theater. Um, each February for the last 3 or 4 years, myself and others have partnered with the theater to pro- provide films and bring in speakers and others to uh, share share different facets of the Black community. Um, and so I think that is one way that sticks out where you can access that. Um, and also know that, of course, that's going to be nuanced, right? Because so what I had to learn in Moscow, so I am what they call a American descendants of slaves, meaning that my great grandparents were were born on this soil, right? They were not from Jamaica or the Caribbean, and of course there are those that came from the continent. But what I'm saying is uh, my understanding and connection to the U.S. is different than someone that may have come from the Caribbean, right? Are from uh, are from the continent. One of my good friends says, one of my good friends says, there's going to be a different perspective if you came to the U.S. or your parents came to the U.S. on Delta versus being on under the bows of a ship and in chains, right? So you're going to have a different perspective. So someone that has come from a Caribbean background or from an African background is going to see this as a land of opportunity, right? Whereas a Black person who has experienced rape and plunder and all those things that came with the Black American experience is going to look at this country and racism in a different way. But we also can feel like that this is our land, right? In a different way. Whereas those who may have had Caribbean or African background, they can always, well, they may not want to, but they can say, well, I have citizenship in another country and have that kind of, well, if I'm forced to go, I still have a place to go. Whereas Black Americans, this is our place. I don't know if I answered the question, but
No, I think it sounds like showing up is a big, go to the Kenworthy when they have these films, go to Friendship Square to celebrate Juneteenth, go to, a few weekends ago the Black Student Union had their gala, go to these things. Um, I think that's a big takeaway that I know can be small but also meaningful.
and do and we need to double down, triple down on that, right? Because in these times, um it's going to is we can't do it passively. So in the past it was like, oh, the university's going to sponsor it, or maybe the Kenworthy may sponsor it. All of these entities often were supported by the national humanities not
The
national
Humanities Council.
council or things like that, right? Which were funded through the federal government or state government, right? If things continue to be politicized as they are, we're going to have to come out of our own pockets to make these things happen.
Yeah.
And so get ready for that. So this is not something that you can be passive about. This is going to be something that you have to be actively thinking about. And I'm hoping that why I'm so appreciative that Hayley has provided the space is because I'm able to talk about um, solutions for our local environment. If you had somebody that spoke here from California, their perspective may be different. But I've been here a decade now. Can you imagine that? I've been
Congratulations.
here a decade now. So you can't say I'm not Idahoan. You can't say I don't know what I'm talking about. I've been here long enough to have a little idea of some solutions to some of the things that you're asking about.
Well, and we're glad you're here. Um, with that, I think that's a good place to wrap up. Thank you so much for your time and the work that you're doing, both in the community and out, with your time in Switzerland, doing all these other things. You're really enriching the Black community, not just locally, but nationally too. And we really appreciate all the work that you do. And I want to thank everybody who is in the audience. We really appreciate you showing up too. We talked about what are things you can do. Showing up to stuff like this is stuff you can do. And we appreciate your support both of Dr. Freeman and his work and the Historical Society. I hope we can do more Black history programming in the future. And who knows, we'll wait and see what the future holds at this point. So happy Black History Month, and sounds like we've got some work to do.